All right, everybody, what's going on? How y'all doing? Merry Christmas, first and foremost, man. Happy holidays to y'all. Hope everybody's having a great holiday. As you can see, I'm bringing you some swag talk on the Christmas holiday, man. Taking a little respite from the family, about to get back in there and kick it with the fam in a little bit. Shout out to everybody out there doing their thing today, and hope everything's going well for everybody. And today we're going to continue our 12 team season recaps with Alcorn State. We're going to talk about the Braves 2024 season and, what I expected, how things turned out, and, everything in between. So with that being said, man, y'all hit the socials, Facebook is Swag Talk, Instagram Swag Talk, Twitter Swag Talk 76. I will have in the description the preview, my Alcorn preview. So you want to go back and listen to what I thought the Braves would do this season, you can do that. Or you can also check it out at the end of the video. There will be a link in the end screen, so if you want to check it out there. Also, don't forget to like, share, and comment, and subscribe to the channel, man, if you haven't done so already. It'd be a great way to ring in the holiday season by hitting that subscribe button and becoming a part of the Swag Talk fam, man. So let's go ahead and jump into this. We're going to talk a little Alcorn State. First and foremost, like I said, I just to be 100, I picked Alcorn to win the West. I thought that was the team to beat in the division, and I stood by that probably till about mid-season before I realized things were going other ways. But I tried to ride that wave as long as I could. I predicted Alcorn to finish with a record of 8-4, 6-2 in conference. Ultimately, they will finish the season at 6-6 and 5-3 in conference. So one game off in the conference record, 2 games off in the overall record. Just for transparency, my predictions for them were to lose the UAB and Vandy, and then they will. I had them winning their next 6 games. Honestly, beating Edward Waters, beating McNeese, beating Valley, beating Pine Bluff, beating Grambling, beating Southern. They won 4 out of those 6. So I came up short there. I had them losing to Bama State, which they did. I had them beating Texas Southern. I had them losing to Prairie View, which they defeated, and I had them beating Jackson State, which obviously was way wrong because JSU just blew them out. Like I said, to look at the actual results, they lost. They opened up the season with a 41-3 loss to UAB. They lost to Vandy 55-0. They defeated Edward Waters 38-7. They lost to McNeese 42-14. They beat Valley 42-21. They beat Pine Bluff 38-28. They beat Grambling 17-15. And they lost the next 2 games to Southern and Alabama State 24-14 and 21-17. They beat Texas Southern 42-21. They beat Prairie View 26-13, and they lost to Jackson State 48-10 to get them a 6-6 record, 5-3 in conference. Finished the season losing their last game, going 3-1 at home, 3-4 on the road, and 0-1 in a neutral site. Some of the thoughts I had about this team, and we'll kind of do the recap this way by going over my general thoughts. My first one was to find a way to get touches for Truck Griffin, and I thought they did that pretty well. He ended up having 25 carries for 194 yards and 5 touchdowns, average 7.8 yards per carry with a 64-yard touchdown against Southern. In the receiving game, he ended up leading the team with 41 catches for 376 yards. No touchdowns through the air, surprisingly, this season. But this was an offensive attack through the air that only threw 7 touchdowns on the season. So not a lot of production through the air. And so he was unable to cash in on touchdowns, but he led the team in yards and receptions. Had a 47-yard reception as well. And so I guess when you look at 41 receptions and 25 carries, that's 66 touches. So I think that's a pretty solid number for a tight end. That's obviously more than any other receiver got at all. So they definitely did make him a focus of the offense, and so that's something that I really was happy to see. I think he's a guy who is definitely a playmaker for you, and you need to get the ball in his hands. And I thought they did a good job of that. I said the running game would be a strength for them, and it was this past season. The Braves finished the season second in rushing at 197 yards per game, 26 touchdowns, 5 yards per carry. Um, when you look at their rushing attack, they were led by two guys, Xavier Vaughn and Jacorian Sewell. Sewell finished the season with 735 yards and 5 touchdowns on 128 carries. He averaged 5.7 yards per carry. And like I said, 5 touchdowns with a longer 82. And then Xavier Vaughn had 128 carries as well for 727 yards with 5.7 yards per carry and 11 touchdowns. So this team finished with 26 touchdowns, and those guys combined for 16 of them. They also combined for the bulk of the carries and pretty much the bulk of the yardage that this team gained. So they were the reason that Alcorn was able to even put things together um, as the season went on. Because when you look at this team, especially with the running game, early in the season they ran for 117 against UAB, 40 against Vandy. They hit 168 against Edward Waters, 217 against McNeese, 299 against Valley, 311 against Pine Bluff, 156 against Grambling, 214 against Southern, 181 against Alabama State, who had the top rushing defense in the conference, 302 against Texas Southern, 184 against Prairie View, and 160 against a Jackson State team that was second in the league in rushing defense. So other than the first two games against the FBS opponents, which they had a combined 157 yards on the ground, they finished. They finished. They ran for no less than 156 yards in every game this season. Other than those first two, in the other 10 games, the lowest amount of rushing yards they had was 156 yards. So that definitely shows you that this team was a very strong running team. Ran for over 300 yards two times. Had three more games with over 200 yards. A couple of games that weren't that far off from 200 yards. So they did a really good job of establishing the run game from the Edward Waters game on. Um, and they just, that's who they were. That was their identity. I think the difference in this team in winning and losing was their passing attack. But like I said, the running game definitely was a strength. The offensive line helped that out. They Coach Thomas, he has a vision and he's still working on it. And you kind of see things start to come together for them as the season went on. Like I said, it started off slow with those two FBS games, which to me doesn't give you any advantage, to play two of those games in back-to-back weeks, especially when you're breaking in so many new pieces really on both sides of the ball, but especially offensively. You just don't really have a way to get it done. I mean, that just it just hurts you, and so it took them a while to really get going in those games. I mean, they threw the ball combined for 91 yards in that first two games, and so under 250 yards of offense between their first two games, no touchdowns, only one field goal. They just really really hurt themselves in developing. And then, they had a slow start against Edward Waters before they kind of pulled away from them. And then McNeese was another game where they played pretty well offensively. Probably one of their better overall total yardage games. They had 204 yards through the air and 217 on the ground, but just defensively, they just couldn't stop McNeese. And that was an issue for them in that game. And then, they did well against Valley. And then they came from behind 14-0 against Pine Bluff. Before things kind of even out when they got to a tougher stretch of their schedule. But I thought Coach Thomas is establishing his team still, and I thought they did a pretty decent job of, righting the ship and, basically being able to start conference play with a 3-0 record, which gives you so much leeway. Now, it kind of fell apart on them losing their next two games, but, that opening stretch of the season where they went 1-3 and their three losses weren't close at all. I think you can kind of fold, with bad leadership. I think you kind of fold, but I think they had a solid vision and they stayed with it, and they were able to kind of get themselves in the mix in the conference, and ultimately finish a couple games out of first, finishing second place. establishing a QB early, and you can pretty much say, in terms of a guy, they did that. Xavier Vaughn really was the guy. He got the start, and he basically, other than missing time for injury, he was the guy all the way through. Basically to the point that Tyler Macon moved over to wide receiver later in the season. Trey Lawrence came in from time to time, to spell Vaughn if he got banged up or anything. But Xavier Vaughn was the guy for this team at quarterback. He did a he did a adequate job with the team. I think sometimes he had a couple games where his passing numbers may not have been where you really want them to be, and that kind of hurt them in some games. But I do think that he did a great job being a weapon for this team with his legs. He had a stretch in there where he threw for 255 against Edward Waters, 204 against McNeese. He had 105 against Valley. His Valley game was one of his lowest productive games. Had 162 total yards in that game between rushing and passing. 217 against Pine Bluff through the air, plus 157 on the ground. He was instrumental, tremendously instrumental in that Pine Bluff victory with 3 total touchdowns as well and no turnovers, no interceptions. Grambling, he had 172 yards through the air. Now he had a 2-game stretch toward the end of the season for various reasons. His last 5 games, he finished with under 100 yards passing. 76 against Southern, 87 against Alabama State. I know he got banged up in the game. Texas Southern, he threw for 171. Purview had 49, and Jackson State had 94. So through kind of not being as productive and being banged up in some of those later games, his numbers really dipped, and his rushing numbers also kind of dipped to a degree. He ran for 55 against Southern, 7 against Bama State, again 130 against TSU, 31 against Purview, and 20 against Jackson State. So his last few games, his numbers kind of tailed off a little bit, and that's and that's almost indicative of what Alcorn was. They lost 3 of those last 5 games, so that really kind of shows where they were. But he was the guy. You kind of put your eggs in a basket and you trust that guy to be that guy for you. And when you do, you have to take the ups and downs, and the ups were very high, and the downs were kind of really down, and that's kind of the ebbs and flows of this team in this season on the offensive side of the ball. That was one of the things that I really expected from them. And he did a pretty good job of being a weapon, especially with his legs. I said that scoring needed to increase. They finished the season averaging 21 points per game. They finished the season averaging 21.8 points per game. Last season they finished averaging 22.4 points per game. So their scoring average went down by about a point from last season. So again, kind of looking at this team, they were they were kind of all over the place. You had 2 games where you scored 3 points or less. You scored 38 against Edward Waters, 14 against McNeese, had a 42-point game against Valley, 38 against Pine Bluff, 17 against Grambling, 14 against Southern, 17 against Bama State, 42 against TSU, 26 against Purview, and then 10 against Jackson. So, like I said, they were kind of all over the place. They either scored a lot of points or they didn't score any. And so that's a big reason why their scoring total was so up and down, just like a lot of the team this season. One of the things I thought that would be a strength for this defense is was their pass rush. They've been a team in recent years that's been really strong on the defensive side of the ball, especially getting out of the quarterback and making things tough for teams. This season they finished with 24 sacks, so that's pretty much middle of the pack. But I thought with a guy like Malachi Bailey on that defensive line, you would really have a good pass rush, and they were able to kind of cause some problems for guys. Bailey finished with 9.5 sacks. Edwards, Henderson, and Ross each had 2.5 sacks apiece. So they did a pretty good job of in certain games of being able to be disruptive. But they just, like I said, a lot of times they just really couldn't put it all together at all times. I mean, they finished the season with allowing 175 yards on the ground and 172 through the air. So they were a very good pass defense. When you look at where they stacked up in passing defense, they actually were fourth in the league, and they had 11 interceptions, which also helps because I'm sure a lot of it came from quarterbacks being under pressure. They finished fourth in interceptions with 11, um, and that's a good reason. Sacks, interceptions, fumbles, all that goes together. They finished the season leading the conference in fumble recoveries with 12. They had 23 takeaways on the season, and they were a very solid team. I mean, um, it says they forced 11 fumbles, but I guess maybe a special teams fumble recovery fell in that number. But they did a really good job of forcing turnovers. 23 as a defense. They turned the ball over. 21 times. So they had a +2 turnover ratio, which always is going to help you in games. I think that's something that I always value taking care of the football and taking it away. And I thought that was one of the things that really did them in. And that was one of my thoughts to continue to win the turnover battle. Now it wasn't as high as it was last season. Last season they were +11, but they still ended up winning the battle even at +2, a little more even because the offense turned the ball over a little bit more this season, which is to be expected with a new quarterback and a lot of new skill guys. New offense. You're gonna have those bumps in the road, but they were able to still win that turnover battle. I said another thought that I had for this team was avoiding surprising losses, and when you look at the season, they didn't really lose to anybody in conference um, that they shouldn't have. The only loss I would say, and not necessarily the loss, but how they lost would be the McNeese game. I thought they would beat McNeese because they beat them the previous two times, but they just, McNeese just, really outdid them in this game. But they had no surprising SWAC losses. They beat Valley, who finished behind them in the standings. They beat Pine Bluff, who finished behind them in the standings. They beat Grambling, who finished behind them in the standings. They beat Texas Southern, who finished behind them in the standings, and they beat Prairie View. So the only three teams they lost to were the East and West champs and basically the runner-up in the East. So they had no real surprising losses, which it has been kind of like a mark for this team the last couple of years. Losing to Texas Southern back-to-back years is always one of those games that could be a hiccup. But they did not have that this season. So if that's one thing, they were able to win the games that you're supposed to. And they basically lost everybody who had a better record than them or was a higher level than them. So they did. They were exactly what I always call a 6-6 team or a 6-5 team. Those teams always beat the people that they supposed to, and they lose to the people that they kind of supposed to. Um, so they were right there in line with that. Survived the first 2 weeks. As far as basically being able to bounce back from that, I can say they did that. Like I said, those first 2 weeks were rough. And basically, you say the first 2.5 games because the first half against Edward Waters was kind of rocky. Second half they got going again. They kind of slipped down against McNeese, but they came up with two big offensive games, especially against Pine Bluff, which was what they needed. And then they won a defensive battle against Grambling. So starting off 0-2, and then basically wrapping up your non-conference schedule at 1-3, and winning your first three conference games, putting you at basically 4-3 before you get into the middle of October. I think that's surviving the first 2 weeks. Like I said, they didn't really do much to hurt their standings in the conference. They actually came out ahead. They went into the Southern game with a half game lead over Southern, and they were really in good position. And even coming out of that game, they still were in good position to win the West before they lost to Bama State the following after their bye week. So I thought they did a good job of getting things right because when you start off like that, losing those two games the way they did by the totals that they did, Sometimes it's tough to get back right. Even with a D2 game after that, it's still kind of tough to get back right. But they did that, and so I would say they survived that. Um, One of the things that I said that they needed to do offensively um, was to stretch the field in the passing game because I thought that with them being able to run the ball the way they do, I thought that I thought they needed to be able to kind of put the ball down the field because that would open up some things for a new rushing attack, and they kind of did, but they weren't really great at it. Um, they averaged 10.4 yards per catch on the season, so not nothing truly explosive. Most of their guys who had serious targets didn't have more than about 12 or 13 yards per catch, which is not bad, but that's not really a super explosive down the field type of offense. They had a couple long catches by Tyran Warren. He had a 73 yarder on the season and he had a 73 yarder, and then he had a game with 97 yards against Edward Waters. Where I think he had a big reception in that game. Um, when you look at their longest catches of the season, 73, 47, 42, 36, 32, 31, 27. Those are all from guys with multiple catches. So not a lot of explosiveness in the passing game. And then again, this is also an offense that had 149 yards per game through the air. They just didn't really have that there in their attack. And sometimes when you run the ball like they do, you don't necessarily have to be able to throw the ball because obviously the way they ran it, even if teams stacked the box, having a quarterback that can get out on the edge and break loose, kind of still stops that a little bit. So they were still able to survive even without the attack being as explosive down the field as I thought they may needed to be. So I thought they didn't have to do that, or they couldn't do it, one of the two. But that was one that did not come true for me. Another one that I looked at coming into the season was their return game. They really haven't had a great return game. This season, it got a bit better. They averaged 16.4 yards per punt return on the season, with a long of 46. I think the season before they were way shorter than that. And then the kickoff return game, they averaged 18.9 yards per return on the season with a long of 45. Those numbers, when you look at them in comparison to everybody in the conference, they finished ninth in kickoff returns, and they were first in punt returns. So I think they did a really good job with the punt return game, um, which helps out a lot in those games. Um, Amarion Blake's had a 12.6 yard average on the season, 9 returns for 114 yards with a longer 31. So I think that was something that they did improve on, and that's always a key factor in anybody's offense. And anytime you can get those extra yardage, the hidden yards, like they like to say, I think that makes your team a lot more dangerous. Um, Better starting position all the time can change games, even if you don't score. But if you start at your 35 or 40, the offense crosses the 50, and you have to punt, you start another team deep in their own end. So being able to start closer to midfield is a whole lot better than starting further away from midfield. And I thought they did a really good job with that in the return game. When you look at the other factor in special teams is the actual kicking game itself. Noah Kiani was still a solid kicker this season. He was 9 or 12 on the season with a long of 50. He was 1 for 2 from 50 plus, 40 to 49 yards. He was 3 or 4, 2 or 2 from 30 to 39 yards, and 3 or 4 from 20 to 29 yards. He did have 2 kicks blocked though, so that's something that kind of is a factor. Um, and Franklin Rogers was a solid punter, averaged 41 and a half yards per punt on the season with a longer 73, 8 punts that were fair caught, and 13 inside the 20, and 950 plus yard punts. So they were pretty solid there. Um, that was a key factor in their team last year as well. So I think having a guy that you can trust to kick the ball makes your offense even more dangerous because you can score from anywhere on the field. And with a good punter, even if you have offensive problems flipping the field, helps your defense out a lot. And so their defense wasn't as great as they had been in previous years, but they still were a very solid unit. And some of that is because of their special teams unit. Because this you had offense that didn't score much, so you really had to do a lot on defense. And this defense was fourth in total defense at 347 yards per game. They finished eighth in rushing defense at 175 yards per game. And like I said, they were fourth in passing defense at 172 yards a game. So all in all, this was a solid defense. I mean, when you look at the defenses that were in front of them in most of those stats, nobody was going to pass them. So being some of those numbers in other years would be first place or second place. So, I thought their defense was really good. There was just a lot of defense, couple defense in the conference that were just that much better. And because of the early season, it made their defense look a little bit worse. Um, just to kind of put it in perspective, in conference play, they had more. In conference play, they allowed 23 points per game, which put them at sixth place. Again, that's taking away all those totals from those FBS games. Um, Rushing defense, they were fifth up from eighth. Again, taking into account subtracting those total those FBS games. In conference play, they were fifth in total defense at 326 yards per game. Like I said, they were fifth in rushing. They were eighth in rushing defense at 151 yards per game. A lot of teams were really strong against the run this season. Passing defense, they were fifth at 175 yards per game. Defensively, they had 22 sacks in conference play, which was actually third. So when in that aspect, their pass rush was actually top notch in conference play. Um, their numbers improved because, like I say, playing two FBS games out of four non-conference games is definitely going to skew your numbers. And, having, three blowout losses in non-conference is definitely going to skew your numbers. And then once you get in the conference play, those numbers start to come down a little bit, but some of them are a little too high to kind of get under control. But, when you look at a team with their conference numbers, that's kind of a more adequate version of who they are, because you're playing against like teams, every week. And so you kind of really got an idea of who they were. They were a team who was going to run the ball, which in conference play, again, they were second in the rush in the running category with 227 yards per game. Their passing attack in conference play was 154 yards per game, up a little bit, but still, pretty low. So, and in conference play, um, their scoring went up to 25.8 points per game. So in conference play, they scored more, but obviously when you score 14, 0, and 3, your numbers are going to be down overall. But, all in all, like I said, this was not a bad season. It was a 6-6 season. It's a nice foundation to build on moving into next season. You got some of the stuff out of the way. You're still going to have some turnover and reevaluating, but they're recruiting well, which they did last season too. So I expect to see Alcorn still in the mix next season. I think they're going to come into the conference media day, ranked pretty highly in the division. And so all in all, like I said, I had this team at 8-4, 6-2 in conference with a ceiling of 9-3 and a floor of 6-6, which is where they finished. Um, and so, pretty much other than, a game here and there was kind of like I expected with all my thoughts. So with that being said, man, I'm the tour guide around the SWAC. See well, signing out, and I will catch y'all on the rebound. Peace.